First task was to actually find the grid tools. Obviously started looking through the menus, see if there's anywhere obvious. Hadn't spotted it on the bottom toolbar, so I was just kind of working through, check the main home menu, thought have a look at keybinds would be a good place to start. So just having a kind of work down through the keybinds, see what it was. At this point managed to find them, so it's found the keybinds, found one that was not bound already, so just reassigned that one quickly. And just having a general read through what some of the operations were for that. And then it was work out how to get the tool up, how to actually use it. Obviously initially kind of looked for the toolbars, had the pencil. I totally missed that when the spanner came up it was purple. I think because I was on the cube side, you don't immediately pick up the purple spanner. Again, check the keybinds just to make sure I didn't miss something. And I say it took a few goes, just kind of working around, and then the brain suddenly clicked that, oh hang on, we actually have something slightly different here, and we have a purple spanner. And that was it. It's like the purple wrench, here we go. And next question was, how does this actually work? So put a block down. I say still took a little bit to kind of work out, and then obviously see the commands coming up in the bottom right corner, and it was like, okay, I can now create a grid. So that was the initial part. And I say it was a bit of confusion having it on the thing. Obviously the controls, they bring up the arrow direction controls, obviously for moving it. I'm fairly used to these from things like Miner and things like this, in using rotation controls and actual arrow key controls to move things around. One thing I did notice with this, it's when you're moving it around, obviously you need a little bit of distance between you and itself just to kind of get to grips with it. And so you can kind of bring it back on yourself as you do this. So it's quite an interesting one. I say once I got hang of the kind of picking up the bars to actually move it, it wasn't too bad. And so obviously then it's starting to have a kind of look at the options. Obviously you have kind of weld grid, and you have what it's called, the other grid, the actual grid. So obviously it's kind of working out your movement patterns from there. Obviously you can disappear yourself inside a block, which is good fun. So it's just taking a little time to get you used to how these controls worked, how you could move things around. One thing I did find, it was if you're looking to align, it's obviously if you're using weld grid, it's not too bad, you can align quite easily. So it's just something going to take a little bit of practice, and it's going to be a learning curve definitely for people to use this tool. Obviously the rotation tool's fairly simple, as I say, kind of Miner and things like that. It's got a similar kind of just rotation angles, so for me this was kind of fairly easy to work with, to figure out kind of the directional rotations. So just having a look at the kind of side menus and working out various commands and what you could do with. Now this confused me because I suddenly ended up 1,000 feet up in the air and not really understanding the purpose of this, what this was for. Because obviously the only option you had was to close it and come back down to ground again, and then couldn't work out the initial concept of what that area is for. So obviously I don't know if it's something part of the development that you would be able to kind of work up there, but yeah, it was a little bit of confusion at that point. So yeah, it's just kind of looking at really the commands, the controls, what you can actually do with it, the way different things interact, obviously how blocks are, you can select and things like this. It was quite interesting, obviously with like things like the pencil tool, how you select etc on a block. So it's it's just getting the kind of mind around how this process works, and obviously creating grids. Again, it was how you interact on some of these things. I say this was the first initial run, so it was definitely a little bit of a puzzle to kind of work your way through it. Okay, so here is kind of when you're looking at angular movement, you've got no indication of the angles you're actually moving. So obviously while you've got the X, Y, Z up in the corners, you don't have angle. So when you're actually rotating a block, if you're going to be building things up, it'd be useful to have some indication of the angle the block is actually at. Yep, then obviously found the scale command, which is yep, I say lovely and easy to work with. Obviously gives a clear indication of the direction you can scale in and how to scale. Again, with scale, you don't have an indication of the actual scale you're at, so it would be really useful to be able to have that information, because obviously if you're going to be building up an area made out of multiple scaled blocks, it'd be very useful to be able to have an input of scale, or actually have an indication of what scale you actually have got the current block to, so you can scale the other items to it. So yeah, generally carried on kind of playing around with it, playing with the scale, playing with the kind of rotation of the blocks and the kind of position of the block. So obviously first thoughts back, I say these basically cover some of the comments I've just made. So generally movement controls work well. Very happy. So obviously the ability to kind of see a scale value and kind of rotation angles will be very useful in here. Now, say part of the initial confusion here is obviously I was thinking, okay, you build your bits up and you assemble them. It didn't kind of trigger first of all. It's actually easier to build a whole object up and then just scale it to the size you need. So the initial kind of thought was, okay, I was just playing with a little set of blocks, and obviously then I thought, okay, I'll scale it and kind of move it to on top of something. And this is where you suddenly realise it's actually trickier to, when you're trying to move stuff around in a 3D space, it's actually quite tricky to get that positioning right, because obviously if you move your character, it moves the scaling too. So it was quite tricky to actually position a block on top. I wanted to position this on top of the other block, and to get that into the right place, it was actually quite tricky. As you can see, I'm kind of all over the place with this one, but yeah, it was this part of it I was finding, it's not easy to actually position blocks when you've got them scaled. Obviously you have to be wary of which on the X control, on which angle whether you have air or things like this, because that does change how you can manipulate the block. As you can see, there is quite a challenge to actually move the block into the right place. what I did like is being able to actually use the control to be able to sculpt the block. That was quite a useful kind of ability to have. You could actually build a block and then you could actually sculpt the blocks that are there. Yep, obviously the comments reflect the comments I've just been making. That now, one thing I did discover, which is just a bit later on in the video, is if you create an object, scale it, then try copying and pasting it, it pastes it back as a full object you initially started with, rather than the scaled object. So obviously there is that thing of actually retaining the scale, size, angle, dimensions need to be captured. And as you see, build big and then scale it. So yep, obviously that's seems to be the best way if you're going to build things up, is to actually just build it first and then actually work on the then play around with the scaling. Obviously you can make bigger, smaller, but yeah, I say it would be really useful to have some indication of what scale you're working to, or even preset scales could be quite an option on this one. You could have some preset scale sizes. If it would make it easier for players to say, okay, I just want to scale it by 200%, 100%, 50%, just something that kind of allows an easier way of working. Yeah, for the first initial attempt would let's build a chair and take it from there, sculpt it up a little bit and then scale it down to a suitable size. Yeah, I thought this is just kind of an interesting way just to get some idea of how it works, how you can manipulate a kind of a group of objects like this. It just takes a little bit of work to understand the dynamics of it, how it actually works. Yeah, there's a huge amount of scope within in what you can do with this. So, and I say it's, to me, having the ability to export these and bring them into other worlds and things like this would be superb. You'll see it's easy enough to move them around, position them. I say the only time it becomes more fun is when you've got a scaled object, then obviously you just have to be a bit more wary of the boundaries of the real world. Again, it's just time kind of experimenting with the controls, seeing what they can do, see what's capable of them. I'll say it's kind of testing how far you can be back from an object once selected. Also get an idea of kind of the range you're working with. So obviously if you're working with a large object and you want to scale it, change its size, then obviously it's good to be able to kind of move away from it to have that ability. It's, again, this was a challenge to actually put the chair back down on the ground, because obviously you lifted it up a little bit initially, but then it was how to get it back down to the ground level. So this is the test, just to select it all with a pencil to see if I could copy it. Obviously use the pencil tool, selected it, Control C to copy, and then went to Control V it to put it back into the world, and then suddenly got a very large chair. So the question is, how do you duplicate a grid object to maintain kind of angles and things like this?